Show, episode 17. We just had some quick technical difficulties, but thank you for your patience and persevering through them. We're super excited to join you for another show and answer any and all questions that you have related to mind, body, and masculinity. And I'm your host, Dr. Sepah, and I'm a clinical psychologist and professor and CEO of Maximus, and here to answer any questions that are burning on your mind in terms of how to optimize your health, hormones, and overall life. So thanks to everyone who's joining us on Clubhouse. Thanks to everyone joining us on YouTube Live. Thanks to the folks joining us on Discord. I see you, Greg and Diego. And thanks to the folks joining us on Instagram Live. I see Jason Rubin and the Kahuna. So if you, we always prioritize people who are willing to ask live questions. So if you'd like to do that, unmute yourself on Discord and feel free to chime in. If you're on Instagram, you can either type in your question, although it's always easier to do a dialogue. So you can invite yourself up and we can do a live stream as well. If not, then we do have some questions that were user submitted from folks that can't join us live. Maybe you want to do the one from Discord.
Yeah, we have two from Discord. One is about loneliness. One is about no fapping. Is there anything someone could do to commit to that, and alternative stress release activities? So which one do you want to do?
Well, why don't we do the loneliness question? I think that was a pretty good one.
Okay, so today we have a question from Matt on our Discord. Hey, I don't know if Dr. Cam answered this, but could he talk possibly next time about how to deal with loneliness? I wish I could call in, but unfortunately I work Thursday nights. I feel alone in that I want to date someone, and also that I think I want someone I can get better with, a best friend essentially. I think I'd rather figure out how to date someone. It just feels rough because I keep feeling like I need to fix all these other things before I can date. My financial situation, my body shape, I'm too skinny, but then I get depressed basically and I feel alone. It feels rough because it's hard to talk about this with anyone else.
Yeah, great question, Matt. And first and foremost, sorry that you're dealing with all that. It's kind of a heavy burden to bear. Not only do you got sort of the feelings of loneliness, but it sounds like you're trying to make all these improvements to yourself, which I appreciate. But it does get into a little bit of a chicken and the egg situation of like, do you fix yourself first before you go date? Do you date while you're fixing yourself? And in the end, sometimes I know that can feel very overwhelming. And leave you feeling even more alone, which is what sounds like it's the case. So first and foremost, why don't we just talk a little bit about loneliness? And from my perspective as a psychologist, loneliness is a symptom. It's not the underlying root problem, right? Loneliness, if you think about it, is the signal that your mind body is telling yourself that there's something essentially wrong oftentimes. And what I mean by that is that human beings are intrinsically social creatures. We really aren't meant to be alone for very long periods of time. In fact, one of the best pieces of evidence to validate that is essentially solitary confinement, right? What's the worst punishment that you can do to a very hardened prisoner in a maximum security prison is to, quite frankly, leave them alone. And it is very challenging for someone to be alone for too long of periods of time. In fact, that's why solitary confinement is often considered torture by some groups of people, and I actually agree with that philosophy if you're talking about long-term solitary confinement. So we were never basically meant to be alone, and loneliness, particularly if it's chronic. I'm not talking about acute loneliness. You feel lonely like one particular night on a Friday because your friends are out and you don't have anything to do. That happens to the best of us, happens all the time. So I always think it's important not to necessarily avoid feelings. But if it's kind of a persistent long-term feeling, especially like loneliness, then it may be a useful signal that there's something awry in the way that you're handling or dealing with life. So it may be useful to listen to that if that emotion is rooted in some reality or truth, right? There are other sort of emotions that we may not want to pay attention to as much, but Loneliness, I think, is actually one of them, given our social or tribal nature. So I do think it is useful to listen to that. And the first thing I would say is, it sounds like you're obviously single and you're looking for someone to date. Then I think it's useful to channel that energy into going on the dating market and trying to find someone. And while it would be great to find a best friend and someone that you can grow with, I think that's a longer term goal. In the immediate short term, it may just be useful to practice putting yourself out there, practice talking to and meeting people, and if just going on dates. And obviously, in the process of doing so, you may find someone that's a suitable best friend or long-term partner. But a lot of people, just for the socialization, for not necessarily feeling so alone, just putting yourself out there, I think, is a useful starting point. And that's what I would suggest to you. Now, as it pertains to, do you need to fix yourself before you go on the dating market? I have a little bit more of a nuanced answer to that question. I do think there are certain things where focusing on yourself acutely may be beneficial in terms of addressing those things first versus going on the dating market. One actually example is, let's say you're overweight, and it's clearly depicted in your pictures. People can sort of tell. Quite frankly, you will be judged rightly or wrongly for that. The reality is, especially in this very hyper-competitive dating market, how you look and your pictures are the first thing that people use in order to screen you. And so let's say you're 20 pounds overweight. It kind of shows in your face. You could literally spend 20 weeks addressing that, looking better, and it literally will improve your dating prospects. So there may be, it doesn't mean that every person who's overweight needs to necessarily lose weight before they can date, but the reality is if you can put in the effort and you're highly confident that you can, and it's something that you want to work on anyway, knowing that it's going to improve your prospects, it may be a good idea to do that, because that's the reality. Now, that may be an unpopular sort of opinion, but the reality is, especially if you're a guy, the average distribution of how women rate attractiveness, they actually consider the majority of men unattractive. So you really have to stand out in online dating. This is a statistic that comes from Tinder data, I believe. Essentially, the top 20% of men compete for the top 80% of women, and the bottom 80% of men essentially compete for the bottom 20% of women. So if you're not in that top 20%, whether that's in terms of your looks, your lifestyle, or something else that you can offer, whether that's your humor, your talent, etc., personality-wise, it may be useful to figure out how to address that. Now, in your particular case, though, you mentioned a couple things: your financial situation, your body shape in terms of being too skinny. Yeah, those are things that if you feel like they're detriments, you should address those. Quite frankly, men are judged for their financial situation. However, in that case, that's something that you're probably not going to change overnight. It's going to be a slow, gradual climb in terms of improving your financial situation, finding a new job, or kind of getting promoted, changing your careers. Same thing with being too skinny. It's much easier to lose weight. Like I said, you can lose 20 pounds in 20 weeks, maybe even in 10 weeks, depending on where your starting point is at. But putting on muscle is very slow. Like realistically, unless you've never lifted weights before, you're not going to put on more than a few pounds a year if you're an intermediate or advanced lifter. So it is something that you should do. I'm a big fan of obviously strength training for building muscle and confidence. But I think these are slow, long-term improvement, self-improvement projects, personal projects, if you will, that you should engage on. I do not think in your particular case that you need to drastically change your financial situation or body shape before you can go on the market, the dating market, and date. What I would suggest instead is absolutely go work on those things and date at the same time. Because what you're going to find is that there's almost like a positive reciprocal flywheel. As you improve your career and your financial situation, your confidence is going to increase. As you improve your strength and your musculature, your confidence is going to increase, and then you're going to go on the dating market. As you're doing that, even if you're not all the way there, I don't think any sort of strength athlete, weightlifter that I know is completely satisfied with their body shape, even if they don't have orthorexia. but you can gain more and more confidence. Even if it's I put on a pound, I can lift 10 more pounds, I'm making $10 more an hour, whatever it is. That confidence, I think, carries across in how you carry yourself, your demeanor, and your confidence, and women are attracted to confidence. And same thing, as you improve your dating really is a skill. You can get better at it. You will also find that, okay, I don't get necessarily as socially anxious when I'm dating. If I've been on 5, 10, 15 dates, I know how to carry a conversation. I know how to, ask interesting questions. I know how to be charming, witty, funny, and that does take practice. You have to kind of put yourself out there, go through those difficult situations, and then you adapt and you practice like any other skill. As you do that in your dating life, you will also, that confidence will carry forward into your career and your physical training as well. So I actually think it's very complementary to work on yourself and work on your dating at the same time. Knowing that really in the end, while you are going to be evaluated for how you look and what you bring to the table in terms of your ability as a provider, the thing that I want to emphasize is what women are really looking for is they want a man who feels confident in and of themselves. And the thing is, you can feel confident without getting to the destination, right? As long as you have confidence that you will eventually get there, that can carry across as confident, right? So let's say you're doing a minimum wage job, you're making $15 an hour, you're a young skinny kid, and you haven't accomplished anything in life. That's okay. That's where all of us started at some point. You know what I mean? I weighed 130 pounds when I was in high school, maybe 145 when I was in college. I've lifted weights now, I weigh 175, right? I put on 30 pounds of muscle, but that comes over the course of 10 years of plus of training. It's just, like I said, it's a slow and steady climb. But the thing is, if you take the mindset now that when I look ahead 10 years into the future, I am going to be stronger, I am going to be in a better financial situation, and I'm doing all the right things today to push me towards that direction, you can feel confident. As an 18-year-old, a 22-year-old, however old you are, you have confidence that in the end you will succeed, you will prevail, even though you're being brutally realistic about the current situation that you're in. And that's something that's called the Stockdale paradox. So to give a little story about where this comes from, Admiral Jim Stockdale was a Vietnam veteran who was a fighter pilot. He was shot over his jet was shot over Vietnam, and he was imprisoned in the notorious Hanoi Hilton, where he was basically tortured for years. And the way that he got out of it, he was talking about, actually, it was not by being overly optimistic. People who were overly optimistic thought they're going to get out by Christmas, they're going to get out by Easter, and those holidays would come around, and they were disappointed when they weren't released, and so they'd almost die of a broken heart. On the other hand, people who were very pessimistic, and they never thought they were going to get out, they basically also died of a broken heart because they had no hope that anything was going to get better. And so what he did, when this is the Stockdale paradox, is he was brutally realistic about the situation at hand. He knew that things were not going to get better immediately. He was in a obviously very difficult situation, very unpleasant, but he knew that in the end he would prevail. He would come home to America, and it would become the defining story or event of his life. And that's exactly what he did. And he went home and became a very prominent politician, kind of like John McCain, another famous POW. So I really think that's a very useful mentality to have, especially as a young man, is you have to be brutally realistic about the situation that you're in now. You should take day-to-day actions in terms of working on yourself. And if you need a system to do that, I always advocate, you might have heard it in my previous episodes about using the Keystone habit. You spend 4 minutes at a time talking about what you're going to do for the next 4 hours and continually improving. The idea is you go back at the end of those 4 hours, you check in. Did I do what I said I was going to do? If not, why not? And how can I do it differently? And if you do that a few times a day, every day, for a few weeks, months, and years, I guarantee you that you will come out and be better at the end of that. So the nice thing about doing that is you will see continual improvement, or kaizen, right, is a Japanese concept of continual improvement. And you'll start to gain that confidence. And so if you meet a woman in the process of doing so, right, you're not where you are, you will want to be financially, you're not where you want to be in terms of gaining muscle mass, but you're confident that you're going to get there, even if it's in a few years, 5 years, 10 years, that confidence is going to come across. And she's going to think to herself, this is a guy who, A, when I'm with him, I feel secure, right? This is a guy who's going somewhere. And even if he's not there, this guy has a plan. He's taking day-to-day actions towards that plan. And I'm confident that, this guy is like a rocket ship. If I hitch my wagon to this guy, I know that we, as a unit, are going to end up in a better place. And you see this all the time, right? With even folks like Barack Obama, who met his wife, Michelle, when they were very young lawyers, right? Barack Obama was not the guy that he is now, but he was he was a winner in the sense of his confidence, the accomplishments that he had so far clearly put him on a trajectory of success. And most importantly, he had a great deal of confidence that he knew he had the capability to be someone who, quite frankly, is presidential or achieve a very high level of success, right? And so I think this is kind of what's called inner game, right? You really have to work on your inner game or your inner mentality about how can you have really a genuine confidence, right? And even if it's not what you have right now, but it's a confidence that in the end that you will succeed and prevail, combined with taking very realistic day-to-day actions toward it. And I think if you embody that, right, you internalize that, you believe that, and you do that in a way that's very authentic and genuine and it comes across, you can date absolutely right now without having fixed any of those things. Because like I said, the trajectory, the slope is the women that you date are going to feel that. And so that's why I do think you can do it simultaneously. You don't need to fix all of these things, but you should absolutely be working on it starting today. So that's kind of my long-winded answer to that question, but I think it's an important and kind of complex topic, right? So to kind of summarize it, if there's very clear short-term wins, like you can lose 20 pounds, or you can fix a very clear anger problem that comes up on date 1 or date 2, yes, fix those things because you're going to just do better on the market. You're going to look and present better. If there's easy short-term fixes that you can do. If there are long-term fixes, though, that should not stop you from getting out on the dating market. You can do it concurrently as long as you internalize the confidence that you are a man that's going somewhere, you're a man that's in control, you're a man that has confidence that they will succeed in life, and that security and confidence and kind of peace that you have with your life will come across, and people will naturally be attracted to that, right? So the thing is, women are very intuitive. If you really are insecure, anxious, not confident, they will suss that out, and you could try to fake it till you make it. Maybe that'll work on the first date or two, but eventually, they're gonna know who you are. And so I do think it is worth addressing that. And if that's difficult to do, maybe it is helpful to get into a therapy with someone. So that's the other thing that I would suggest is, this inner game is a process in and of itself in terms of increasing your self-confidence and your security. And obviously you can implement some of the things that I've suggested as a blueprint for starting that process. But it is really helpful to be able to work and develop a relationship with a psychologist so that you can work on that together and they can give you feedback along the way. So that's kind of my answer. And then one last thing to just add to that is, look, in the process of dating too, loneliness isn't just about romantic relationships. Obviously, as men, you have a unique inkling for physical intimacy that can only come from a romantic partner. But I would also suggest in the meantime, you may want to focus on building your relationships with other men as well, in terms of friendships, best friends, that kind of thing. If you have good relationships with male friends, obviously it's not a substitute for dating, but it may reduce some of the loneliness of just being alone, which I think a lot of people are obviously feeling in quarantine because we're just spending too much time in isolation. So like one very concrete suggestion, and I've shared this with clients, is I actually suggest to a lot of guys that Friday and Saturday nights, which are the typical nights for going out on the town, a lot of people like go out to bars and clubs trying to look for or hunt someone, which is kind of the busiest and most competitive time. I actually suggest the opposite, which is kind of a contrarian view. Spend time with your male friends, right? Like have your group of boys go out. There's the classic Barstool Sports Saturdays for the boys, and take those time to develop those close, intimate relationships with your guy friends. And then actually during the week, I would actually suggest going on dates. Women first of all, are much more available Sunday through Thursday because Friday, Saturday, they're often going out on the town, whether they're with a group of their girlfriends or, like I said, you're going to be in a very competitive context in a bar or club. And why sort of try to swim upstream against the river? You have a much higher likelihood of when you're asking someone out that they're free Sunday through Thursday. So I suggest scheduling your dates on those non-busy dates of the week, and try to meet people naturally during the day outside of bars and clubs, walking around the beach, walking around the mall, a bookstore, a coffee shop. All of those are great places to meet people, and also meet people of higher caliber and quality, right? So if you like someone who likes to read and is educated, a bookstore is a good context for doing that. If you like doing athletic things, meeting someone naturalistically in a co-ed sports league is a great way of meeting people who have similar interests and lifestyles to you. So I think those are very helpful contexts as well. And if you have solid male relationships in the meantime, as you're going and doing those things, you're not going to necessarily feel the pressure of, oh man, if I don't fill my schedule with dates, I'm going to feel alone. Versus if you're going out with your guy friends 2 days a week, you're hanging out with them, doing other things, hobbies, sports, things that you enjoy. Even if you're having one date per week, you're not going to feel lonely because your social calendar is already feeling full. And she's going to notice that as well in terms of, oh, okay, this is a guy who has his life together. He has good social circle, and he's engaged. He's not feeling lonely. He doesn't come across as lonely or desperate. So work on your friendships. It will actually enhance your dating life as well. All right. I see more and more folks have joined our Discord. So if anyone wants to chime in, just unmute yourself and ask your question. I think we got 4 people on Instagram Live, so you can type in your question or ask to join as well. If not, we can go back to the submitted questions. And hi, Toby from Clubhouse. Feel free to chime in if you'd like as well. Do you want to talk about NoFap?
We have that.
Let's do that.
We have that one. We also have one. It's a follow-up about ADHD, and then one last one, which is about DHT and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors.
Mm-hmm.
So up to you.
We'll do each of those in order.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. You want to do NoFap first?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. Okay, we had a question submitted from Discord. Would love to get Dr. Cam's thoughts on the NoFap movement and suggestions for high-impact alternative stress relief activities if one is committed to the NoFap movement. Many thanks.
All right, great question. So just for listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, so NoFap is obviously slang for no masturbation movement. There's other terms for it as well, such as No Nut November. And it's, I think, increasingly kind of almost organically arose as a movement because probably there's a contingent of guys who have engaged in excessive masturbation thanks to the proliferation of online pornography. So I don't think this was as much of a problem. It was probably much more rare, essentially speaking, in terms of people who had problematic or compulsive masturbation. But I think the combination of like ubiquitous online high-speed pornography, the fact that we're alone a lot more, just makes it a lot easier, quite honestly, to kind of go down the slippery slope of compulsive behaviors. So I think as a result of that, a lot of guys, quite frankly, found themselves addicted, quote unquote, to pornography and started NoFap as a way of addressing that. And it's kind of an abstinence-only approach. To me, it's kind of an extreme point of view. It sounds like the person who asked this question it sounds like they're committed to it. Although this is why I think it's useful to talk about it. Let's just talk about the science of it. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with masturbation or sex. So as long as it's done in a healthy way that doesn't damage your personal health, the health of others, or interfere with your social or your occupational functioning, right? In fact, if you're a male, there's good research that suggests that orgasm and seminal release, in terms of releasing sperm, is actually healthy for your prostate. So, having an orgasm, let's say once a week, is actually probably good for prostate and overall health. So if that's the case, that's actually contrary to the entire no-fap movement. The problem isn't masturbation, it's how often you're doing it and how compulsively you're doing it and how much it's interfering with other things. If someone said, I masturbate once or twice a week, or let's say even once a day, if they're kind of a young man or high testosterone individual, and it doesn't cause any problems, they're not excessively using pornography, it's not interfering with their ability to have intimacy with a partner if they are in a relationship, or it's not reducing their drive to go out and seek a relationship. That's one thing that people should be aware of, though. If someone is excessively chronically masturbating in order to obviously satisfy themselves sexually, but they are not, they're losing the motivation to go and find obviously a partner where that would be much more enjoyable and ideal to do in the context of a long-term monogamous relationship, then yes, that's where it may become problematic. So I think the real answer to your question is, what is your relationship with masturbation, and is it causing any problems? If it's not, there's no problem with it from a psychological or physiological perspective. But if it's becoming sort of excessive, then yes, it may be helpful to try to curb that in. But I think, given, like I said, like sex, like eating, is almost like a basic biological function, I don't think abstinence only or no-fap, quite frankly, is the answer. Most of the time when people do these kind of movements, they're only doing it for a temporary period of time, right? They're going for a few weeks at most. That's why they try to do it for the month of November. But it's really not a sustainable approach long-term. I don't know anyone who doesn't masturbate at all for like a year. Especially as a healthy young man with normal testosterone levels. Quite frankly, that sounds torturous, I would say. So what I would suggest is moderation is a much more effective approach for, whether it's problematic eating or excessive masturbation. If the thing or the trigger that's problematic is pornography, then you should address that in particular, right? And so, for instance, I had a client one time that could not successfully masturbate an orgasm without pornography, right? So that actually started to become problematic, where I was like, well, if you can't do it without pornography, you've essentially created dependence on it. And so part of the treatment was actually getting him to masturbate without pornography, right? Just using his imagination or using physical stimulation to be able to do that. And it was something that eventually, with obviously some practice, he was able to do. So if the real issue is pornography, then I do think it is fair to be abstinent from pornography. There's no reason or need to have any pornography, quite honestly. That doesn't mean pornography is bad. If you're occasionally engaging in it, like I said, it's not causing any problems in terms of excessive time spent, getting caught at work or causing any problems in terms of your relationships. Every once in a while, again, it can be used healthy. We have to analyze the behavior in terms of, is it done reasonably in a non sort of addictive or compulsive way, or is it excessive? In my experience, most of the time when people are going and doing no-fap, it's really because of excessive pornographic engagement. So address the underlying problem. You don't need to stop masturbating forever. And one final note on this, there's a lot of these crazy right-wing bodybuilding gurus on Twitter who are convinced that not ejaculating gives you some sort of superpowers. There's no science behind that. Like I said, in fact, it's healthy for your prostate every once in a while to ejaculate. So, do that in a way that's reasonable and healthy. And I don't think there should be any shame about healthy sexual function, healthy sexual behavior, especially in the context of a partner. Obviously, if you're doing it with a partner, practice safe sex. Be clear in your communication about whether you're doing it monogamously or not. And follow all the basic rules of social and health decorum. But I'm not a fan of no-fap. I'm a much more fan of being reasonable and engaging in healthy sexual behavior in moderation. In fact, one final note, I actually consider intimacy, whether that's emotional or physical intimacy, to be kind of the fifth foundational health behavior. We need intimacy, including physical touch, including sex. we are, if you think about it, your biological purpose is to procreate, and there's no stronger reinforcer or reward than sexual enjoyment. So I think we should be proud about that, even though there is unfortunately a lot of social stigma around it. Do you want to talk about? Let's do the DHT question, actually.
Okay. Did you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
Why don't you read it?
Okay, we have a question from Discord about DHT. If you have context on this, thoughts on DHT and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors in the case for
Propecia finasteride.
Propecia finasteride. If you don't know too much, maybe comments on DHT specifically and if it's really important.
All right, so this person is asking about a hormone called DHT. So most people have heard about of testosterone as kind of like the master sort of male hormone, but there are other androgens or male hormones that are very important, like DHT. So DHT is actually a derivative of testosterone, and it converts essentially naturally in your body from testosterone to DHT via an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase, or 5-AR for short. Now, DHT has a lot of different biological functions. I like to call it sort of like the aggression hormone. It's kind of when your DHT is high, you feel a greater amount of confidence. You have a little bit more of that aggression, that edge, like a little bit more of that risk-taking, if you will. It's kind of associated with those things. So I actually think it's useful and it's good. The downside of it is for people who are genetically predisposed to hair loss, or what's called androgenic alopecia. Androgenic meaning androgens like DHT contribute to it. So when DHT binds to the receptors, particularly in your scalp, it's associated with greater hair loss. So that's why one of the FDA-approved treatments for androgenic alopecia or hair loss is 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. It's basically drugs that inhibit the enzyme 5-AR, as we talked about. So it basically blocks the conversion from testosterone to THT. Of course, logically, as you do that, your testosterone is going to be slightly higher because less of it's converting to DHT, and your DHT levels will plummet to what are called sub-physiological levels, so even below the normal range. So finasteride does work to some degree in terms of reducing hair loss. Typically, at least in my clinical observation, it tends to slow down hair loss. I don't see a lot of people regrowing hair, although some people are able to regrow hair on it. But there's two main downsides, in my opinion. The first downside is in a small percentage of people. Now, they've looked at this in terms of the frequency of this. It's pretty rare. I would say it's single digits, 1 to 2% of people do experience sexual side effects from 5-AR inhibitors like finasteride. This is called post-finasteride syndrome. The downside of it is in that very small percentage of people, it seems to persist even after they discontinue the medication. So even if after they stop taking Propecia, which is the brand name for finasteride, they're still having persistent sexual dysfunction in terms of low libido, inability to orgasm, and other sort of sexual problems. But it's been enough of a problem, and it's really debilitated that small percentage of people that they're very active, they're very vocal online. There's a lot of websites where you see people complaining about it, and there's been lawsuits, quite frankly, about it. So it's rare, but unfortunately, it is pretty drastic in terms of the side effects. So the majority of people, and this is why your doctor was like, at least in your doctor's opinion, it's fine, because it is fine for the majority of people. But I do think there is a small but significant risk that if you take it, that you may develop sexual side effects, and they may not go away after you stop taking it. So it's up to you and your doctor in terms of weighing that risk and whether it's worth the trade-off of, obviously keeping your hair. So that's one downside. Downside two, though, is, as I mentioned, DHT, like testosterone, is a key male hormone and androgen, and long term suppressing it to levels that are sub-physiological, meaning like you're in the bottom 1th percentile of guys, means you're losing your masculine edge. The aggression, the competitiveness, the risk taking is going to decrease, because it's not just blocking it at the site of the scalp, it's blocking it systemically in your body. Propecia or finasteride is an oral medication or pill, so it's blocking it all over your body. Now, I do think there may be a future in which we have topical creams that or foams that only inhibit DHT at the scalp site. But unfortunately, even topical finasteride, which I see companies out there promoting it, pretending like it doesn't absorb systemically, it totally does, unfortunately. In fact, I've looked at clinical data that 0.25% topical finasteride inhibits your serum DHT levels, meaning your DHT levels in your blood, as much as 1 milligram oral finasteride, the pill. So even if you take it in a pill form or you take it as a dropper or a foam, it still absorbs. And the reason is because the scalp is highly vascularized. There's a lot of blood vessels in your scalp, and it does absorb. You're dropping that on your head, and it's trickling in every day. So the reality is, unless you're getting a blood test, you can't actually measure your DHT, by the way, in your blood, and that's why I've looked at this data. The topical version, unfortunately, is not any better. So I actually think long-term DHT inhibition is not a great idea. Some people do think there's an argument in addition that it's not just DHT contributes to hair loss, but it contributes to prostate growth, right? So guys get something called BPH, benign prostate hyperplasia, I think that's the term. But there's the research on that is actually equivocal. There's in fact studies where they gave people synthetic DHT and it didn't necessarily enlarge their prostate. In fact, there's an alternative theory that some of the prostate growth that you see in guys is actually because of estrogen, not DHT. So I don't think we necessarily need to be afraid of DHT. It's there for a reason, and artificially suppressing it down to the 1th percentile. Yes, it may or may not save your hair, but it's gonna have systemic effects, which to me are just not worth it. I do think alternative FDA-approved medications such as minoxidil or Rogaine, it works through a different mechanism of action. It's not a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. What that does is it induces vasodilation, and so increases blood flow to the scalp, which helps promote hair growth. Minoxidil is very mildly effective, I would say. It's over the counter. It's not prescription. You can go get it at any pharmacy. But at 5 to 8% dosages has been shown in studies to at least help a little bit. And I think for most guys, they're just trying to get all the help that they can get. I do think there are better stuff that is more effective for hair growth, hair and beard growth, and that's something we can talk about in a future episode at some time. All right, Naza on Instagram asked a question about pine pollen and boron. I assume you're talking about the use of those supplements for increasing testosterone. So happy to talk about that. I'm not aware of any scientific literature on the benefits of pine pollen and testosterone. Quite frankly, anything herbal or over the counter is not going to do very much for your testosterone at all. Most of the studies are not done in a way that's very rigorous. They're often done in animals. There's a bunch of studies that show all kinds of stuff increases testosterone in mice, but it just doesn't translate very well to humans. And if it does, it's a very small difference. It's going to make no clinically meaningful impact. You're not going to notice it. It's not going to improve your performance in any sort of way. So I'm very skeptical about things like pine, pollen, deer antler. I don't know what kind of crazy stuff people are using. Doesn't really do much. There's a Shelgiate, which is some like fungus that grows on rock. This all kinds of crazy stuff these days. None of the over-the-counter stuff basically works. Now, boron is something that's a little bit different. Boron, I believe, is an essential mineral or metal. There is some research that shows that boron basically inhibits SHBG, or sex hormone binding globulin. SHBG binds to testosterone and makes it less bioavailable in terms of acting on your body. So what boron does by binding to SHBG is it increases free testosterone, the more active form of testosterone, slightly. So there is research that actually supports the use of boron in terms of increasing free testosterone, which is the kind of testosterone that you want. The problem with boron, however, is SHBG also binds to estradiol or estrogen. So it's going to not only increase your free testosterone, but the part that nobody talks about, and they should be talking about, is it also increases free estradiol. So you're getting an increase in kind of testosterone and estrogen at the same time. So for some people, that trade-off is worth it because they're not particularly high in estradiol, and the little free testosterone boost that they're getting may get a little bit. Like I said, the boost that you're going to get from boron is probably not going to be clinically meaningful, even if it is statistically significant. Let's say it goes up 10, 20%, you're not going to feel a 10 to 20% difference. It's the same thing with ashwagandha. That's another common one. It goes up 14.7%. According to the one study that I've read, you're not going to feel that difference. Unless it's going up 50 to 100%, you're not going to notice the difference. It's just, it's not drastic enough. But what I would say is this is where it's useful to actually know what your SHBG levels are. If you're someone that has high SHBG, boron may be helpful for you to kind of bring that SHBG down and get your hormones at an optimal level. If your SHBG is naturally low, and these are folks who are particularly insulin resistant, so if you have predisposition to prediabetes or diabetes in your family history, those people tend to be low in SHBG. You do not want to take boron because your free testosterone actually may be already pretty decently high, but your free estradiol is pretty high too, and it's going to push you over sort of the normal range, and you're going to get probably more estrogenic side effects than you do from any benefit that you get from increasing your free testosterone. So that's why it's not a useful thing to say, is boron helpful? I would say boron is helpful if you have high SHBG. Boron is not helpful if you have low SHBG. And unless you test and do a blood test to know where you're at, I would not generally recommend it. And anyway, it's something you should probably consult with your physician about in terms of messing with your hormones. They also asked a question about bovine testicle. This is a great question, actually. There's a lot of like traditional cultural, like traditional Chinese medicine traditions where if you eat the body part, that part will increase in you, right? So if you eat testicles, and your testicles will become stronger. It's a nice myth. There's no science that I know that supports that notion. It's a great idea, but I don't think it plays out in practice. So like I said, nothing over the counter that I know of really works in any significant way. And like I said, there's a difference between statistical significance and clinical meaningfulness. You can get a statistically significant increase, like I said, a 10, 15% increase, but it's not meaningful in any way. You're not going to notice any difference. You're not going to perform any better. So who cares if statistically it works in a paper? If it doesn't work for you in the real world and you're not noticing it, then sort of what's the point of taking something that costs money and may have additional side effects? So I don't recommend anything over the counter if your goal is to increase testosterone. If that's your goal, you should work with a doctor who specializes in hormone optimization. We're obviously doing some really interesting work in that realm, so stay tuned. You can sign up for MaximusTribe.com, and we'll give you more information as we come up with that.
We had a quick question, super quick. Via YouTube, is magnesium good for anxiety as a supplement?
Yeah, it's a great question. Magnesium is one of my favorite supplements for other reasons, not for hormonal reasons. But first of all, most people are magnesium deficient. Unless you have a highly optimized diet, you're really like, eating a lot of healthy meats, seafoods, highly nutrient dense fruits and vegetables, you're more likely than not magnesium deficient. And most people, again, in consultation with your own doctor, would benefit from magnesium supplementation. Magnesium is one of kind of the 4 core minerals and micronutrients. The other ones being potassium, calcium, sodium, and magnesium. Now, sodium, as I've talked about in a previous episode, we get more than enough of because we salt everything. And basically, if you eat out, you're probably getting too much sodium. the interesting thing is I actually disagree with most of the folks out there that recommend that you get 5 grams of sodium a day. There's a lot of people in the keto community that believe that because they look at associational research and that shows that people who consume 5 grams of salt a day have the lowest death rates. But we know that epidemiological associational research is fundamentally flawed. If you look at hunter-gatherers, they're consuming less than a gram of sodium, a fifth of that a day, and they're doing just fine and have lower rates of diabetes. So I'm much more concerned about diabetes, quite frankly, than I am some theoretical mortality risk that is probably flawed anyway. We should not be consuming too much salt. It's not that salt is bad. We do need it. It is an essential mineral, but we get more than enough. So I think for the if you're talking about a standard American, they don't need any extra salt. On the other hand, we do need extra magnesium. I always think with all things, it's better to get it from food. Try to eat magnesium-rich foods, which come from like meats, certain fruits, green leafy vegetables in moderation. But a lot of people, if they're trying to take magnesium acutely for to address a certain issue or to optimize it, particularly the 2 issues it seems to be most helpful for are anxiety, to your point. So it does kind of calm the nerves, so to speak. And so I do suggest in consultation with your physician that approximately 200 milligrams of elemental magnesium. My 2 favorite forms are magnesium glycinate, which is a chelated form of magnesium, and the other one is magnesium taurate, which is bound with taurine. Taurine itself is an anxiolytic, reduces anxiety. Those are both good forms. The other reason that people take it is for sleep. It does seem to help people sleep better. So if you're the kind of person who's anxious, has trouble sleeping, taking some supplemental magnesium, if your physician agrees, may be a good idea for you.
We got about 5 minutes left, so maybe time for one last one. See if anyone online wants to ask. If not, we can do the ADHD question on managing it chemically. That's like the question for that.
All right. Does anyone want to chime in with a question in our last 5 minutes from Discord or Clubhouse?
Okay, we had one last question from Discord. Last week you talked about ADHD. You mentioned the Keystone Habit and other frameworks for organization. Do you have any recommendations on managing it chemically without medication?
So yeah, it's a kind of a tricky question in terms of how do you manage it chemically without medication. Usually managing it chemically involves medication. So I would say, what does that really mean? Are you talking about supplements? So if that's the case, I would say, why are you afraid of medications but not supplements? I think this is a useful topic, actually. People, for some reason, are afraid of prescription drugs but not supplements. For some reason, they think it's more natural, even though, by the way, it's not the case. It's different if you're talking about an herbal supplement. Yes, that's quote-unquote natural because it may be from a plant. But, some of the supplements that are released are, synthesized or not natural at all, just as medications are not. However, the major difference, though, is the good thing about prescription medications is that there's very strict pharmaceutical standards. When you get a prescription medication, you can be almost assured that it's like 99.9% exactly what it said it is. It was produced and manufactured recently, so it's not expired. It's very strictly controlled. The supplement industry, however, is like a total Wild West. There's been numerous consumer reports and research studies that, let's say you bought 10 different brands of magnesium, as we were just talking about on Amazon, it would probably come back with 10 different varying percentages, going for anywhere from like 80 to 99% magnesium that is claimed on the bottle. So the dosage that it says it has on the label is often not what it is at all. And unless it says USP, which is like United States Pharmacopoeia standard, something like that, USP grade supplements, it's very unlike, you don't know. It's basically like you're playing Russian roulette, and not only may not have the dose that you think it does, but it can often be contaminated with heavy metals, toxins, God knows what. So supplement industry, not that all supplements are bad. I obviously take supplements myself. I try to buy them from more trustworthy brands that are higher quality. So like Thorne is a great brand, and other brands that doctors sort of can recommend are better choices. So given that's the case, I don't think it's helpful to have sort of chemophobia or like a fear of chemicals just because they're sort of prescription. In fact, I would say there's a greater risk of harm from supplements versus very well studied medications that have low side effect profile. Now, there are medications that are risky. I do actually think in ADHD, you're talking about stimulants, typically stimulant medications, which include like Ritalin or methylphenidate or Adderall or Dexedrine or what are called the amphetamines. Those are controlled substances because they can be addictive. They can reduce appetite, cause weight loss. So they're non-trivial medications, but the thing is they have the greatest preponderance of evidence for the efficacy of ADHD. If was working with a client in conjunction with their psychiatrist, if they genuinely have ADHD that's been properly diagnosed, the ADHD medication by far has a much stronger evidence base, and it's going to have more likely than not a stronger effect than any sort of herbal supplement for ADHD. So it depends on the severity, right? If you're talking about a clinically significant impairment of ADHD that's moderate to severe, you shouldn't just be afraid of taking medications. If that was the case, I would say, look, you should go work with a great psychiatrist that specializes in ADHD and find a medication that works for you if your goal is to manage it chemically, right? That's what the person was saying. I really do think, however, in addition to that, you should engage in sort of behavioral interventions and treatments as well, because the medication will help you focus better, right? But the thing is, if you don't focus on the right thing, you're going to hyper focus on Reddit or cleaning your room or things that may not be the task at hand. So you have to combine the benefit that comes from ADHD medication with a system, a program, a structure in place that makes sure that you're applying that focus to the right thing. So I do think it can be complementary to use both pharmacological and behavioral interventions so you can kind of get the best of both worlds. Obviously, if you don't have true clinical ADHD, you want to probably lean a little bit more on the behavioral side of things. If you really have a moderate to severe amount of ADHD, you probably want to lean a little bit more on the pharmacological side of things. As a general rule of thumb, based on the research evidence, in conjunction, obviously, with your doctor. So that's kind of my point of view. Don't be afraid of chemicals. It just depends on what chemical, where it comes from. So I don't think like these generalizations are very helpful. You have to kind of evaluate each of these things in turn, because all drugs are not the same, all supplements are not the same, where they come from is not the same. So I realize it's a very scientific answer, but the reality is, look, this is the complexity of the real world. We have to live in the nuance of it. So awesome. And I think we got a little comment on Instagram that says, thanks for hosting this. The part about male relationships was very relevant and helpful. Thank you so much for the feedback. Really enjoyed this show today. So just to summarize our conversation, we had a lot of great questions that were user submitted. We had a question about addressing loneliness and whether you should fix yourself before you go out on the dating market. And I talked a little bit about how actually you can do both of those at the same time. And it's actually beneficial and synergistic to do that in terms of increasing your confidence. We had a second question about the no-fap movement and whether it is healthy or not to engage in abstinence or masturbation versus addressing the underlying issue around, which is often pornography addiction. We had a question about DHT and 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, which simply put is like, what's the benefit or downsides of taking medications like Propecia or finasteride for hair loss versus alternative approaches to dealing with hair loss. And what else was the other question that was from YouTube?
The other one was magnesium, anxiety.
And a question about the utility of taking magnesium, which can be very beneficial for anxiety and sleep. And we also talked a lot about various supplements, the problem with sort of the supplement industry in terms of being unregulated and you don't know what you're getting, and how basically most over-the-counter supplements don't do anything for hormones if you're trying to boost your testosterone. So a lot of great questions that span the gamut. from the psychological to the physiological. And they're great questions because, look, in reality, mind and body are really one. And so it's all interconnected in the end. So really great show today. Thank you, everyone who joined us on Instagram. Thanks, everyone who joined us on Clubhouse. And most importantly, thanks for everyone who joined us on our original community on Discord. If you find this beneficial, let's continue the conversation on the Discord community. You can comment on the channels. We have lots of channels that talk about all kinds of things, whether it's hormones, focus, physical fitness, where you can get advice from people like myself and many more people in our community. So let's continue the conversation offline, and thank you for joining us today. You can tune in again for episode 18 next Thursday, 6 o'clock Pacific. See you then.